I was sitting at this high-end rooftop lounge in Austin last Thursday, and I couldn't help but notice the woman at the table next to me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and she was scrolling through her Hinge feed with, like, the mechanical speed of a high-frequency trader, just flicking away profiles, one after another.
Just completely dismissive.
Totally. And she was clearly frustrated, sighing to her friend about the lack of interesting men in the city, despite being in a place just packed with successful people. Her phone was this constant beacon of digital attention likes, messages, matches. And for her, this wasn't just attention. It was a real-time market valuation of her own social status.
Right. Her stock price.
Exactly. And she seemed to genuinely believe the world was failing her because she hadn't landed this digitally optimized ideal man yet.
And meanwhile, I'm guessing there were actual real-life men in the room.
Oh, absolutely. A guy at the bar, well-dressed, clearly established, looked stable, tried to strike up a polite face-to-face conversation with her.
And what happened?
She barely even looked up from her screen. Just gave him this cold brush off and went right back to her digital hunt. But here's the turn. 10 minutes later, her whole face just transforms.
Okay.
She'd finally gotten a match from a profile that looked like a professionally curated jet-setting photo shoot, a GQ spread. And she was genuinely giddy, almost breathless, showing the screen to her friend like she'd won some kind of social lottery.
Wow.
And in that moment, what I saw wasn't just, a bad interaction. It was a perfect snapshot of a total market distortion. She was competing with thousands of other women for the fleeting attention of this digitally idealized man, while the stable, successful, available man she just rejected was, to her, effectively invisible.
That's a perfect ground-level entry point into what is a massive and often corrosive global phenomenon. What you saw wasn't just one woman being picky.
No.
It was the entire mechanism of a digitally optimized market at work, revealing this harsh, zero-sum economic reality that's bubbling right under the surface of modern romance.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. We're looking at a system that has fundamentally altered the perceived social contract in dating. And what emerges from this extreme stratification is this profound sense of male disaffection, a feeling of being ignored or even exploited.
And that feeling is now fueling some of the most radical anti-feminist ideologies we see today.
Right.
That's absolutely right. So our mission in this deep dive is to really analyze the sociological, economic, and psychological roots of that sexual market failure you observed. We have to understand how the technology creates and exacerbates the problem, how these extremist ideologies like the red pill and black pill try to explain the disappointment.
Using what? Distorted science.
Distorted science, yeah. And finally, the severe societal and psychological price men are paying for internalizing and participating in these closed systems.
Let's start with the tool itself then, the dating app. We used to think of them as just a convenient way to expand our social circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the data suggests they are doing far, far more than that.
Oh, absolutely. They're fundamentally altering our biological and social mating dynamics, and it's almost purely through their extreme efficiency.
It seems counterintuitive. How can being too efficient be the problem?
Well, the core issue is that the algorithms driving platforms like Tinder or Hinge are, in an economic sense, just too good at what they do. Before this era, dating was highly localized. Any minor imbalances in supply and demand for partners were sort of smoothed over by geography, your social network, practical constraints.
Proximity was king.
Proximity was everything. But when you aggregate millions of users onto an app, that efficiency driven by sheer scale and rapid sorting brutally exacerbates even small pre-existing imbalances.
Okay, so what is the fundamental imbalance we're talking about in this specific market?
It's rooted in a pretty basic reality of sexual economics. I mean, studies have consistently shown that, on average, men tend to be more willing to initiate sexual or romantic encounters with women, even if those women are perceived to be below their own so-called sexual market value, or SMV. This broad willingness from the male side creates a situation of overwhelming supply.
And women, in contrast, are the demand side, the bottleneck.
Exactly. They are generally more selective about initiating contact or accepting matches. They are the selective demand.
So you have this huge supply of men all chasing this very selective bottleneck demand from women.
Yeah.
How does the algorithm respond to that inherent pressure?
Well, the algorithm, which is designed to maximize revenue and user engagement, it doesn't mitigate this reality. It sensationalizes it. Since these platforms earn money by keeping you swiping and generating matches, they prioritize popularity metrics above all else.
So it's a feedback loop.
It's a massive feedback loop. Research, even evaluating major dating platforms in really diverse markets, confirms that the recommendation algorithms heavily favor users who are already popular and attractive. If a user is highly liked, the algorithm shows them more frequently, creating the cycle of hypervisibility.
And if the platform is prioritizing popularity, that leads directly to this massive concentration of attention at the very, very top of the male desirability hierarchy.
Absolutely. Think about the economic concept of network effects, but applied to social popularity. The most popular users become exponentially more popular simply because the algorithm promotes them. The inevitable result is that the men perceived to be in the top tier, or, the most photogenic guys who generate the most engagement.
They get everything.
They get an overwhelming share, sometimes almost all of the available attention and opportunities. Meanwhile, the vast majority of men are left feeling ignored, invisible, or just relegated to the bottom of the digital stack.
But hold on, if the top 20% are getting all the attention, doesn't that imply the system is actually successful at matching the most desired people? Is it really fair to call it a failure just because the results are unequal?
That's a really important, critical question, and it depends entirely on how you define success. From the platform's perspective, the system is immensely successful
At maximizing engagement and revenue.
Exactly. Studies that compare these engagement-driven algorithms to, say, an unbiased one show a huge difference. An unbiased approach, where popular and unpopular users have an equal chance of being seen, would actually result in significantly lower platform revenue and fewer overall matches.
So the system is basically rigged to keep the average user frustrated, but still hooked, still swiping.
Yes. Engaged in the perpetual search, it maximizes attention and short-term matches, not necessarily long-term partnership success for the median user. It's not designed for your happiness, it's designed for their bottom line.
And that structural reality just dramatically changes the value proposition for the average man and woman. We're moving from a localized contest for dates to, as you said, a global one.
That is the key systemic shift. Before dating apps, success relied heavily on proximity, shared social circles, and what we might call relationship market value, or RMV.
So things like stability, humor, financial reliability.
Social integration, yeah. All the things that are really difficult to convey in a thumbnail photo. Now, the format of the app inherently prioritizes sexual market value, SMV, the most easily quantifiable metrics. Physical attractiveness, height, curated social proof.
Your competition is no longer just the other eligible guys at your local gym or workplace.
It's every other man within a 50-mile radius who has a better curated profile than you do. It's a gladiatorial contest.
And this changes the subjective experience for the median woman dramatically. The woman I saw in Austin, who historically might have had a pretty limited local pool, suddenly has the selective power of someone way higher up the desirability scale.
Precisely. An average woman who historically had, a handful of local options now has access to hundreds of potential suitors because of the sheer scale of this digital marketplace. This sudden, unprecedented access to a globalized selection pool can, and often does, significantly inflate her selection criteria.
She's only being shown the top guys.
She is exposed almost exclusively to the top 10% of attractive men globally, which leads her to demand partners far above what her traditional localized SMV might have attracted. This process, where the average woman feels empowered to chase this digital ideal, is sometimes referred to in the source material as the inflation of women's egos.
So, the average guy who used to be a perfectly viable partner for the average woman suddenly finds his pool of potential mates has just evaporated.
It's gone.
Because those women have migrated online to compete for the attention of a tiny fraction of idealized men.
That stratification is the core mechanism of the sexual market failure we are talking about. The analysis notes that before apps, a woman who might have been struggling to find a match might have faced some subtle, localized social pressure to, settle for the local options, the average reliable man in her community.
But the apps remove that pressure.
They offer a digital avenue that removes that social pressure entirely and gives them access to a perceived higher tier. And in doing so, the average mediocre man loses his natural mates in the real world.
This intense stratification leads directly into the highly polarized debate about pickiness. On one side, you hear the argument that women's selection criteria are overinflated and unrealistic.
Right. Even among those who are perhaps not high on the SMV scale themselves.
Yeah.
That perspective, which is very common in the Manosphere communities we'll get into, sees this inflation as purely ego-driven. They express this deep frustration that women, sometimes including single mothers or women they deem less conventionally attractive, are too picky and should just be grateful for any male attention they receive.
But the counter-argument to that specific point about single parents is crucial because it highlights the difference between short-term SMV and that long-term relationship market value.
It absolutely does. The counter-argument suggests that single parents in particular should actually be more selective, not less. They're screening not just for a date,
but for a potential co-parent.
Exactly, or at least an adult presence around their children. Introducing just any person into a child's life poses significant risks. So their focus naturally shifts to prioritizing social proof, stability, financial background, verified characteral RMV traits over desperation or just chasing physical attraction.
Which is a highly rational approach. It's about safety, not ego.
It's about necessity and child safety, absolutely. Not necessarily ego inflation. But the digital market, as you said, it collapses that critical RMV criteria into just the SMV criteria. It's all about the swipe.
And this returns us to the foundational concept embraced by these communities, hypergamy.
Hypergamy. The tendency for women to seek partners who are more attractive and/or economically successful. In the red pill context, this is treated as an immutable, almost physical law of the digital age.
But is it truly an unchangeable law, or is this just the narrative these communities use to justify their own exclusion from the market?
Well, they would define hypergamy as an absolute inherent result of basic economics in this efficient market. They present it as a biological driver, not a conspiracy. Women naturally seek the top tier for resources and genes. It's just nature.
But there's a contrasting view.
Oh, very much so. And it is absolutely necessary to inject this. In Western, industrialized, educated societies, some research suggests that strict hypergamy is actually vanishing. As couples become more equal in traits, especially education, earnings, financial autonomy, and as age gaps shrink, the necessity or the intense desire for women to exclusively pursue higher status men decreases significantly.
So while the phenomenon exists, it's not this absolute unchangeable law they make it out to be.
It's fiercely debated outside of these specific ideological communities, but for the men feeling marginalized, the idea that hypergamy is an ironclad economic law is exactly what gives them the framework they need to rationalize the disappointment.
It provides the intellectual scaffolding for the next stage of radicalization. When an individual feels victimized by an impersonal market mechanism, they go looking for a larger explanation.
And that's where the red pill comes in.
So the average man feels marginalized by this new, hyper-efficient digital market. He's been shut out.
Right.
Where does he turn for an explanation that helps him make sense of it all?
He finds the Manosphere, and the core philosophy they offer him is the red pill.
And the Manosphere isn't one single group, right? It's more of a constellation.
It's a loose constellation of online groups, yeah. You've got men's rights activists, pickup artists, MGTRW men going their own way, and of course incels. And they're all united by a masculine perspective and a core unifying grievance.
Which is?
Their single collective adversary is what they perceive as endemic misandry in modern society. They operate on the fundamental belief that male privilege is a myth, that it no longer exists, and that it's been systematically replaced by a legal and societal system rooted in female privilege and explicit hostility toward men.
The idea of taking the red pill is, of course, directly appropriated from the Matrix, but the meaning is completely weaponized here.
It's a total transformation of the metaphor. In this context, taking the red pill means becoming aware of the hidden, unpleasant truth, that the world isn't fair, that it's a feminist-controlled lie, a matrix.
So it's an awakening.
It's framed as an awakening, and this awakening transforms an individual's personal disappointment, like being rejected on a dating app, into evidence of systemic, gender-based victimhood. Essentially, the red pill is an empty vessel that men fill with their accumulated grievances and disillusionment to justify their marginalized position. It converts personal failure into a form of political resistance.
Okay, so what are the foundational intellectual ingredients they use to fill that vessel? It sounds like they blend this sort of pseudo-intellectualism with a radical market analysis.
That blend is crucial to the ideology's persuasive power, especially for men who are already immersed in Western capitalist culture. The first core ingredient is a radical, hyper-rational application of neoliberal market thinking. The entire red pill narrative anchors itself in capitalist principles, arguing that relationships are purely transactional, women are commodified goods, and men are ruthlessly sorted into a hierarchy based strictly on their market worth.
And this is where they bring in concepts like the Pareto principle to justify the inequality they're experiencing.
Precisely. They use the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, as if it were a literal, unchangeable law of sexual biology. This principle, which posits that 20% of the input produces 80% of the output, is applied directly to dating.
So the top 20% of men get 80% of the women.
That's the conclusion. The top 20% of men, the alphas or chads, get 80% of the sexual opportunities, leaving the vast majority of men competing for scraps or for nothing at all. This framework provides a kind of pseudoscientific, capitalistic justification for the perceived injustice. The system isn't broken, they argue. It's just brutally efficient and rigged against the average man.
And the most popular and perhaps most toxic adage supporting this two-tiered sexual economy is alpha fucks, beta bucks.
Yes, the AFBB framework. This describes what they see as the dual mating strategy of women. It claims women seek commitment, resources, and stability, the bucks, from less attractive, stable men, the betas.
The providers.
The providers. But simultaneously, they're seeking high-quality genes and intense physical attraction, the fucks, from highly attractive, often unstable or non-committal men, the alphas.
And the beta male is just being used for his wallet.
He's often referred to as a cuck in this framework, yeah. Exploited for his resources while being denied the woman's true affection and desire. This narrative is essential because it reframes a man's stability or his economic efforts not as virtues, but as a form of exploitation by manipulative women.
The second core ingredient, which gives this ideology its perceived scientific authority, is the selective and often egregious misuse of evolutionary psychology. EP.
Oh, completely. EP research is co-opted wholesale to provide this veneer of scientific fact to anchor the red pill narrative. They use terms like the dual mating hypothesis, the sexy son hypothesis, or even the concept of the age wall to claim that female mating strategies are biologically predetermined and inherently selfish or manipulative.
The goal being to prove that women's behavior is driven by some ancient unconscious genetic programming that makes them incapable of modern loyalty.
Exactly. Incapable of loyalty or reciprocity. It's all just cold, hardwired calculation.
So let's apply that critical dissection here. What is the fundamental problem with how the manosphere applies these established EP concepts?
There are two main glaring issues. The first is the scientific double standard. The manosphere focuses exclusively and obsessively on female sexuality, presenting it as this monolithic, calculated thing driven by cold, genetic imperatives.
They dehumanize women.
Constantly. They're described as brainless primates following base instincts. But crucially, they completely ignore the evolutionary psychology of male short-term mating strategies, male infidelity, or male resource control. Male sexual pursuit is just normalized, it's unproblematic. Female sexual agency is condemned as manipulative.
And the second major issue is linguistic. It's the misuse and conflation of the word strategy.
Absolutely. In academic EP literature, the term strategy refers to ultimate fitness interests that evolved over millennia. They're unconscious drives, the drive to survive and reproduce. The manosphere, however, confuses this by applying it to conscious proximate behavior.
They make it sound like a boardroom decision.
Yes, they misuse the term to imply that women are consciously executing strategies in contemporary gender politics. For example, a pervasive claim you'll see is that feminism is a sexual strategy, consciously designed by women to locate the best DNA and garner the most resources simultaneously. This maps an antagonistic Darwinian framework directly onto modern social and political issues.
So if the red pill is the realization that you're in the matrix, then the black pill is the ultimate fatalistic destination for those who conclude the game is just unwinnable.
The black pill is the more extreme and dangerous ideology. It's a nihilistic realization that success, specifically sexual and romantic success, is impossible and predetermined solely by one's appearance or genetics. The incel community embraces this idea, defining their belief system as the black pill.
It's the awareness that your social location is permanently hopeless
and cannot be altered by effort, wealth, or self-improvement. It's genetic determinism at its most bleak.
So if you're black-pilled, you just accept that your low genetic or physical quality means you are permanently and unjustly barred from the sexual marketplace.
That is the essence of the incel destiny. This fatalistic worldview is central to their identity, and it's encapsulated by this belief that it's never going to get better for any of us. We're done for. It's over.
And they become avid consumers of research. but for a very dark purpose.
They do. They read a lot of sex research and population genetics studies, but they use the information as suicide fuel or suifuel.
Suicide fuel.
Yeah, because it scientifically reinforces their inherent lack of romantic or sexual value, which leads to despair and, critically, this intense rage directed outward. They deeply resent the fact that others have sex, and they see research on female sexual agency as a cruel, scientific confirmation of their own sexlessness.
The difference between the red pill, which is, try harder, manipulate the system, and the black pill, it's impossible, you're genetically worthless. That seems crucial for understanding the extremism that follows.
It's everything. The red pill offers the illusion of agency, hope for self-improvement or manipulation. The black pill offers the fatalistic validation of their misery and absolute exclusion. And it is the latter that provides the ideological grounding for the political violence and terrorism that defines the most extreme parts of the manosphere.
When we look closely at the black pill and the incel community, the involuntarily celibate, we start to see how this frustration morphs from a personal problem into a political and sometimes even a terrorist movement. Let's first look at the boundaries they impose. Who gets to be an incel?
It's very specific. Unlike many traditional far-right groups that define membership by, say, nationality or race, incels define their community boundaries strictly by 3 criteria: gender, sexual identity, and sexual experience.
Okay, so what are they?
Membership is explicitly restricted to cisgender heterosexual men who must adhere to the core black pill anti-feminist deterministic ideology. And this is the key: they must have never engaged in a sexual or romantic relationship.
That seems like a really challenging rule to enforce in an anonymous online forum.
It leads to constant policing of the borders, using their own specialized terminology. They distinguish between true selves, who they see as genuinely hopeless due to perceived physical flaws like height or facial structure.
And fake selves.
And fake selves, who they believe are just pretending to be incels or have simply been temporarily single. Furthermore, if a member manages to achieve romantic or sexual success, if they ascend, they are not celebrated.
They're kicked out.
They're widely criticized, banned, or expected to leave the group quietly to preserve the core identity of involuntary celibacy and fatalism. Any successful member is a direct threat to the communal narrative of hopelessness.
And the adherence to this rigid definition also dictates their profoundly anti-queer stance.
Absolutely. Homophobia and transphobia are extremely common and strictly enforced. They equate queerness with a feminized identity, and they view it as a direct consequence of the sexual liberation movements of the late 20th century, which they blame for their own exclusion.
What's the logic there?
The logic is rigid. Masculine facial traits equal straight and attractive. Feminine traits equal gay and unattractive. They have to strictly adhere to the heterosexual cisgender binary because any deviation challenges their core definition of masculinity and social value.
What's surprising, though, is that unlike a lot of traditional far-right movements, this is a transnational movement that often exhibits racial diversity.
That is a key academic finding. Incels are a transnational phenomenon, with members communicating globally across North America, Europe, Asia. They explicitly do not concentrate their efforts on one country, and they don't often hold patriotic views of their home nation.
They feel betrayed by their own countries.
In fact, many members actively disparage their country of origin, feeling betrayed by their community, and identifying first and foremost as an incel. This lack of national allegiance makes them a really unique challenge for people studying political extremism rooted in traditional nationalism.
The racial dynamics are equally complex. Surveys show a significant percentage of non-white members, yet the community still holds up whiteness as the ideal.
Yeah, despite the movement's internal racial diversity, with surveys finding nearly half of respondents identifying as non-white, the community still valorizes whiteness as the ideal desired trait for attracting women.
That's where the term "just be white" comes from.
Exactly. They frequently use the term "just be white," JBW, to describe the perceived ease with which white men achieve sexual success, implicitly suggesting that their non-white status is a key factor in their celibacy. This suggests that racialized members still strive toward what is termed hegemonic whiteness, but ultimately their incel status is their master status, overriding race or nationality, uniting them under a common perceived sexual oppression.
So since they aren't united by race or nation, they are united by a common political enemy and a specific ideological program. What is the goal of this movement?
Their political program is defined by violence as a necessary tool for social change. Their enemy is not a specific political party. It's the normie, the general public, and especially women, who support feminism and the perceived sexual and social order that marginalizes them.
They feel neglected.
They believe they have been neglected and forgotten by society, and violence is the only way to ensure their extreme ideological beliefs are heard and validated.
This is the shift from just toxic online chatter to genuine ideological terrorism. They celebrate mass murderers as ideological heroes.
That's the most chilling aspect. They celebrate mass killers like the Isla Vista perpetrator, Elliot Rodger, and the perpetrator of the Toronto van attack as saints who acted on the incel ideology. The Toronto attacker, for instance, explicitly declared he was part of the incel rebellion. They actively applaud, incite, and celebrate these misogynistic acts of mass violence.
Turning individual atrocity into a communal political act.
Yes, and they have specific jargon for committing these acts of violence.
Going ER.
They frequently discuss going ER, which is a direct reference to Elliot Rodger. This term describes an act of mass violence intended to kill as many people as possible, specifically aimed at furthering their anti-woman agenda and ensuring their beliefs are heard by society, often in a final nihilistic act.
And what is the ultimate political goal they seek through this violence?
The overarching goal is the restoration of patriarchy and male supremacy. They believe the existing legal and social structure has failed them by granting women too much agency. They argue that if social regulation can't force women's roles to revert to being subordinate-like property or a belonging of men, then violence must be the answer.
And this is now being legally recognized as terrorism.
Yes, their actions are perceived by some legal systems as terrorism because the intent is to elicit fear and reinforce traditional values where women are subservient. This viewpoint was confirmed in 2020 when a Canadian court legally deemed an attack inspired by incel ideology a terrorist attack motivated by ideology.
The violence isn't always physical attacks on the public, though. It extends into the digital realm, targeting the women who reject them.
Absolutely. The non-physical acts are highly corrosive. Members encourage stochastic terrorism, the public demonization of a broad group in a way that encourages unpredictable acts of violence, and they engage in severe directed harassment.
Doxing and degradation.
Researchers observed members encouraging the doxing and degradation of women who had rejected them, posting humiliating photos of women, and sharing their addresses and LinkedIn profiles. This digital violence is used as a tool of ideological enforcement and pure degradation.
So we've established how technology externalizes the average man's failure, and how the black pill provides this ideological justification rooted in violence. But there is a huge, largely hidden internal cost to participating in these communities. And we see that most clearly in the phenomenon of looksmaxing.
Looksmaxing is the practical pursuit, often promoted under the guise of self-improvement, of maximizing one's physical appearance in pursuit of the social benefits associated with extreme attractiveness.
So it's the red pill's pragmatic answer to the black pill's fatalism.
Exactly. If you are failing primarily because of your looks, as the black pill asserts, then you must surgically or behaviorally fix your looks to ascend and become desirable, thus overcoming the sexual market failure.
But this supposed path to self-improvement quickly turns into a mechanism for self-destruction. The ideology starts weaponizing hegemonic masculinity against its own participants.
That is the core tragedy of the looksmaxing communities. They apply a rigid, hegemonic masculine gaze to their own members. This gaze critiques men's bodies in agonizing detail, facial asymmetries, perceived height deficits, weak chins, poor posture.
Sounds brutal.
It often results in these highly publicized degradation ceremonies where users post photos of themselves and invite others to brutally analyze their deficits. These discussions demean and humiliate users under the guise of providing objective masculine advice.
And they attempt to quantify this inadequacy with a specific, rigid scoring system.
They absolutely do. Attractiveness is rigidly quantified and rank ordered using the PSL scale. The acronym stands for 3 influential Manosphere forums that develop their own supposedly objective criteria for male attractiveness.
Those are rating out of 10.
Right. Men who meet the hegemonic ideal are chads. That's a 9 or 10 out of 10. Men scoring a 3 out of 10 or lower are deemed subhuman, and they're told their lives are inherently worthless. And what's important is that even being average, a 5 out of 10, is seen as insufficient.
Because average men are viewed as unlikely to succeed in this hyper-competitive market.
Right. The ultimate effect of this process is the medicalization of masculinity. It translates complex social isolation and romantic failure into a personal physical failing that requires a specific health or surgical intervention.
That's a fascinating cultural shift. Traditional masculinity often dictates that men should avoid medicine or cosmetic procedures.
But here, men aggressively seek out medical intervention to shore up their perceived gendered performance. They translate social problems into physical shortcomings that must be solved through expensive health commodities and surgical practices aimed exclusively at increasing their sexual appeal. The underlying motivation is the belief that without these often extreme interventions, they will never find love.
We have to look at the sheer extremity of the harmful practices men report engaging in to meet these physically impossible standards.
There are several really dangerous, widely discussed practices. Mewing is one of the most popular. It involves the obsessive and prolonged positioning of the tongue against the roof of the mouth, sometimes even while sleeping,
To change your jawline.
in an effort to achieve a more masculine, defined jawline. And this is done despite a complete lack of scientific evidence that the technique actually works to alter bone structure in adults.
And then there are the practices that involve literal physical self-harm.
Yes. The most alarming is bone smashing. This practice involves deliberately hitting bones, typically in the jaw or orbital region, sometimes with a hammer or a heavy object, to cause small fractures or micro-injuries.
The logic being that the bone will grow back stronger.
The rationale is this flawed biological belief that the bone will grow back stronger, more defined, and ultimately more masculine. This is a practice explicitly tied to aggressive, often violent hegemonic ideals, and men who do this risk serious physical damage, permanent soft tissue damage, bleeding, long-term joint issues.
And the surgical interventions go far beyond typical cosmetic procedures. They're incredibly invasive and expensive.
They aggressively pursue major, costly, and painful elective surgeries. The most discussed is leg lengthening, which involves breaking the bones in your legs and using external fixators to slowly encourage additional growth and increase height.
And the discussions around this are framed with this fatalistic rhetoric.
Oh, absolutely. It's LL or death. They believe only men of a certain minimum height are even good candidates for the procedure. Anyone shorter is often told they would simply go from subhuman to subhuman with LL. They also routinely discuss rhinoplasty, jaw correction, and procedures to correct perceived gynecomastia, all in an effort to mitigate any perceived sign of subordination or effeminacy.
And yet, even when a man dedicates his life and his fortune to this physical transformation, there is a dangerous contradiction built into the system, known as the Goldilocks trap.
The Goldilocks trap dictates that men must thread an impossibly narrow needle of physical perfection. They need some intervention to align with hegemonic ideals and gain masculine status.
But not too much.
But if they undergo too much intervention like visibly excessive fillers, too perfect teeth, or unnatural plastic surgery, they are immediately policed by the community as being effeminate, looking gay, or unnatural. They are denied masculine status once again for trying too hard. It illustrates the perpetual, impossible, and shifted nature of the ideal they are chasing.
The inevitable psychological result of this endless chase and constant criticism is complete internal collapse, which researchers call masculine demoralization.
Instead of functioning as a supportive self-improvement community, the looks-maxing forums become an echo chamber of relentless denigration. Men are positioned as subhumans and failed men because their physical appearance becomes their only salient feature. This profound demoralization, compounded by the fatalism of the black pill ideology, leads to tangible, severe mental health harms.
And we see this reflected in the alarming rates of suicide encouragement on these forums, which makes them a clear danger zone.
That is the most damaging and direct consequence. Despite the forums often prohibiting hate speech against specific marginalized groups, they frequently fail to prohibit discussions or active encouragement of self-harm and suicide.
So they're telling people to kill themselves.
Researchers observed dozens of instances of users telling others to rope commit suicide by hanging or to slit their wrists. Users themselves report being on the verge of suicide due to the intense pressure and the caustic critiques they receive, confirming the palpable mental health risk within the very communities they turn to for support.
So the average man is caught in this debilitating feedback loop. He seeks perfection to achieve an idealized masculinity, but the community's rigid hegemonic ideals perpetually deny him that perfection,
forcing him into a damaging cycle of chasing more extreme interventions or accepting total failure and demoralization. They traded the isolation of the real world for the communal demoralization of the digital one. The irony is staggering. They sought out these communities to fix the unfairness of the digital dating market, but they end up in a system that is equally, if not more, brutal and self-destructive.
So this deep dive began with a single observation. A woman at an Austin lounge, enabled by dating algorithms, ignoring a successful man right in front of her to chase a fantasy profile. We saw how this behavior demonstrated the brutal efficiency and stratification of the new sexual marketplace.
We followed that real-world failure down the digital rabbit hole. We saw how dating apps created the environment for extreme stratification, where a digital Gini coefficient of attention left the average man feeling marginalized and entitled to what he felt society had promised him.
Then the red pill provided the ideological justification for that failure, rooted in this pseudoscientific market thinking and a zero-sum narrative of misandry. This ideology translated directly into severe external consequences, the political violence and stochastic terrorism perpetuated against women and the normie world.
But perhaps the most insidious and tragic effect is the internal destruction. The desire to ascend via looks-maxing forced men into extreme, harmful, and sometimes surgical practices like bone smashing or leg lengthening, only to be caught in the Goldilocks trap of perpetual masculine inadequacy.
The system they subscribe to is one of unrelenting status pursuit. They are chasing an idealized masculinity, the digitally optimized Chad, that the red pill system claims is the source of all success and happiness.
Yet the same rigid, hegemonic ideals of masculinity they seek to achieve are simultaneously the greatest tools used by their own communities to inflict humiliations, self-critique, and violence upon them.
The struggle for status, rooted in the failure of the digital market, ends not just in external conflict, but in the self-destruction of the Manosphere's own members.
It is a system built on perpetual failure by design.